All right, it's 11 o'clock, so we can get started. So welcome to Block 2, Session 1 on Educational Inequities with Amy Terpstra from United Salt Lake City. So before we start, the first part of this will be recorded and then will be available on the website next Friday. And then the question and answers portion will be after that, the 30-minute portion. And then for community standards, remember to be curious and listen to understand, show respect, and suspend judgment. Know any common ground as well as any differences. Be authentic and welcome that from others. Be purposeful and to the point. Own and guide the conversation. So for today, like I said, it's Amy Terpstra from United Way of Salt Lake City. And Amy leads a talented team at United Way of Salt Lake City, working to cultivate partnerships capable of creating lasting, equitable, and social change in schools, neighborhoods, and across the region. Previously, Amy led research and evaluation work at the Chicago-based Heartland Alliance for Human Needs and Human Rights. There, she managed a diverse portfolio of applied research studies with people who were experiencing poverty and intense hardships and trauma. Amy holds a bachelor's degree in social work from Trinity Christian College and a master's degree in social work from the University of Illinois at Chicago. So, Amy, it's all yours.
Thank you so much. It's really exciting to be here with you all on a really historic day, and you're at a civics conference. How could you have planned this any better? It's pretty cool to be on an election week, to have results come in this morning and to know that the conversations that you all have been having these last few days have been about engaging deeply in your community in different ways, not just in voting. So I feel super lucky to be here with you, talking about one piece of stuff that is super important to get involved in, and that's education. So that's what we're going to do today. I'm going to try, I did a little practice run before, so let's see what I can do here. I'm going to get, all right, I just need a thumbs up from, so I'm getting some nods. Okay, I'm doing that correctly. Thank you. So I'm Amy. I use she, her pronouns. And what I would really love to dig into you all today is this question: how will we reimagine education? And I think this is a very relevant question at any point. And we'll talk a little bit about why. But I think it's an especially important question for us to ask ourselves in this moment, in November of 2020, when we're how many months in to a pandemic, when our country has been having a growing awareness and reckoning with racism and where and how that shows up. And I hold, and my colleagues at United Way of Salt Lake hold, that the time might be never greater in our lifetimes to actually do something different in education to address the ways that it's failing so many students and families. And we'll get into that a little bit too. But I want to start on a more hopeful note. If I can figure out how to change the slides, which I appeared, there we go. I'm hoping we can be a little bit interactive here since we're not a huge group. If I can figure out how to view the chat function. So this is, and get prepared, if you guys can pull up the chat function, I'm going to ask you to react. This is my incomplete, but the beginnings of my own personal vision for what schools and education would look and feel like in our community if we truly reimagined them and did them differently so that they helped every single kid succeed. So I would love for you in the chat just to react to this, like interpret it for me. Say what you see here that you can call out as being part of my vision of a more equitable and reimagined education system in the future. And I'll see if I can actually see the chat box.
I can see the chat, Amy, if you'd like me to read it.
Okay, that'd be real helpful. Thank you.
Children learning science, more funding for the arts, are active inclusivity, preschool for all, equal opportunities, healthy lifestyle, STEM pushes. I saw that too. I love the fresh food access, learning in the foundations of our country, the good and the bad, healthy lunches, diverse, college, technology access, addressing trauma-informed teachers.
Yeah, thank you all so much. And if there's anything that's not here that you would put up there, put that in the chat too as we go on. Just sort of keep those really good thoughts running. You guys hit on all of these super important points that are part of my vision, and the ones that I might add to your interpretation that I intended here were around every single kid completing high school with a super solid education that helps them go on to college or to some post-secondary opportunity. I have diverse teachers up here who look like the students that they're teaching. And what's sort of inferred in here that might not be kind of exactly apparent in the pictures is a firm belief that every single student can succeed. And student involvement. This picture over here of kids was meant to kind of represent deep student and family centeredness in the education system. And then somebody picked up on what I intended here around really reckoning with our own history as a community and as a country, and really having the truth of our racist past really be embedded into much more honest and truthful curriculums and teachings of history in our school. So we could spend so much time, and I actually thought about doing this with you, of actually creating a vision together of what we all would feel our education system in schools would look and feel like. But, we only have a little bit of time this morning, so I wet the well a little bit with my vision. But I want to just acknowledge that, I am not an education expert. I'm not a teacher. I am not an administrator. My background, as you heard in my intro, is in social work, but I'm a community member. And schools and the education system are a foundational part of our communities. And as you're going to see in a second, they're not doing that well at really helping every single child succeed. And so as a community member, that should bother me and that should bother you. And we should all have that vision. And we all went to school, right? We might even be in school. So we do have a certain level of expertise just based on our own experiences. So I think, like I mentioned before, that in order to actually really reimagine and actually get to the points of figuring out, what we actually need to do to get to that vision of the future, we need to much more deeply understand where we're at today. So let me just kind of orient you to this chart. This is something called a visual representation of something called the Opportunity Index. And this comes out of many studies about how children kind of move beyond where they grew up and how they advance beyond the economic quintile that they were born into. So every sort of dot on here that I kind of highlighted Salt Lake City, and so you can see the dots that as they line up. The red dots are white children. The slope line is the average, and then the yellow dots are Hispanic children, and the blue dots are Black children. And so these are metro areas, a couple hundred metro areas from across the United States. And again, the slope is the average, and any child that's above, or any dot that's above the dotted line, children have above average opportunity. And below the dotted line, they have below average opportunity. So open up that chat box again and just help me interpret this chart. What are you seeing here when it comes to the state of opportunity in our country and in our local community here?
Someone asked a question about how were the opportunity scores calculated.
Yeah, it's a pretty complex calculation, and I included that link at the bottom, so you can go and explore that later. But again, it's really about how you move from the economic quintile you were born to any economic quintile that is above where you were born. What do you see?
Great inequity.
Yeah.
There's a chance to provide more equal opportunity in education. Megan asked if we could put the link. I can grab that from your presentation, Amy.
Thanks. Yeah, so I mean, this is one of the starkest charts that you might ever see in science. The stark concentration of white students above the average and the stark concentration of children of color below the average line is nearly universal in every metro region. And on the whole, Salt Lake is pretty far on the right side of opportunity, more opportunity here than in many other communities across the country. But even in Salt Lake, you see that white students have far more, white children, I suppose, have far more opportunity than their counterparts that are Black or Latinx. And so the question becomes sort of how and why does this happen? Well, that is really what we focus on at United Way of Salt Lake with something that we run that's called the Promise Partnership. And what we hold is that basically, in order for our community to have truly equitable economic mobility, that we have to provide a really robust pathway from what we call cradle to career. And that at any point along this journey, along this roadmap, if we lose students, if our systems fail those students, we are kind of taking away their ability to succeed in adulthood. And so we really focus in on these different issue areas, as I'll talk about in a second. So just to kind of give you a sense of how we're doing when it comes to our education system, preparing kids for post-secondary opportunities and careers for that economic mobility, I want to just ask you all a few questions. Bring up that chat, and I want to know what you think about this question. What share of third graders in our region are considered proficient readers? Just toss out a percentage point. Is it 10%? Is it 90%? What do you think it is?
We got 60.2, 50, 23, 75, 75, 50 again, 70.
I see Adam there. Your numbers are kind of popping up for me now in the corner. I can see them. So yeah, 70%. A couple of you said 70. That's right. So this is, I should mention that we don't have last year's data because end of year testing didn't happen because schools closed. So this is from the year prior. But you can see over time, it's been, roughly about 70%. Now, take a look at this. If we disaggregate those data and we look at that by different student groups, you see a massive disparity. So this chart happens to be segmented by low income or not low income. And you can see that higher income students, 82% of them are proficient in third grade reading. And this is by the time, this is so young, you're in third grade, and already we see these big disparities. And only just over half of our low income students are proficient in reading by third grade. Let's do another one. What share of eighth graders in our region are considered proficient at math? Math is one of those math proficiency is one of those leading indicators, really has a bearing on how well folks will do in high school and then in college. So what do you think? What share of eighth graders in our region are considered proficient in math? 60?
Yep, 60s, yeah.
50? 5? All right, we're at 42. You all must not remember how hard math was. Yeah. So by the time kids are in eighth grade, only 42, less than half of all kids are proficient in math. But take a look at this. If we, again, look at this by student group, this is looking at students who are proficient in English and children who are learning English. And you can see that less than 10% of English language learners are passing the math test. Now, I should point out that this is likely not because they're terrible at math. It's likely because they don't know English yet and the test is in English, right? And so that's actually one of those visionary pieces that we can think about in terms of reimagining education. Like, what if students were able to take tests that measure their proficiency in the language that they know best? I think let's do one more here. What percentage of high schoolers are considered college ready when they graduate? And what we mean by this is having a score of 18 or higher on the ACT. 5%, 35, 40, 20, 30. So on the whole, higher than most of you were guessing, 59% are scoring 18 or higher on the ACT. And then let's look at that again, this time disaggregated by students of color and not students of color. Almost 71% white students are scoring that and are considered college ready, and only 36.5% of students of color. So obviously, those types of results, those types of disparities, they matter. They matter because your likelihood of to college and succeeding in college are going to be lower if the system has failed you up until that point. The jobs you're going to be able to access, your overall stability and ability to move ahead. And we always, this is a quote that I really like because it's a deep reminder of where to orient your interventions. So this quote just says, every system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets. And what that is a reminder for me, for all of us, is that when you see those deep disparities, we're not trying to fix kids or fix families. We're not putting the onus of responsibility there. We're putting the onus of responsibility on the system, the education system in schools. And what we're saying is they're perfectly designed to get the results that we just saw on those previous slides. And so if we want those data to change, if we want those results to change, we have to fundamentally change the way we do education. So if we want to move the needle and close the gap, we really need to transform those systems. So what we do, I'm just going to give you a few examples, is in our work, and our work is a huge partnership. When I say we, I'm not saying United Way of Salt Lake. I'm saying us plus hundreds of partners from the education sector, from even from business, from government, from community-based organizations, teachers, students, big partnership. We ask ourselves, where is something broken and what can we do to fix it at scale? So here's just a few examples of ways that we have and are beginning to think about reimagining education. So did you know that across the country, 80% of kindergartners go to full day kindergarten? And in Utah, it's about 20%. So imagine if we had an increase in state investment into full day kindergarten. So every kid actually has a chance to get more than just 2 hours of instruction every day. How much more would that prepare them to go into first grade and beyond? So we actually are working very heavily on that and have gotten some really good additional investments to begin expanding access to full day kindergarten. Similarly, preschool is super important. High quality preschool really prepares kids for elementary school and beyond. So we have been working really hard to chip away at implementing universal preschool for all low-income 3 and 4-year-olds in particular. It's shown to be particularly effective for low-income kids. In the post-secondary readiness space, our partnership has worked to put a college access advisor in every Utah high school. We got that win through the legislature last year because college access advisors are shown if a student meets with them, they're like up to 3 times as likely to actually go to college. So it's a pretty cool and pretty simple intervention and change. So money was put into the budget in the last legislative session, and then over the summer and special session with the pandemic and economic downturn, those dollars were taken away, but we're going to be working on putting them back in. All of you, I'm sure, have completed the FAFSA. Utah has the worst FAFSA completion rate in the country. So we have a group that is working to experiment to find scalable practices to actually improve FAFSA completion rates as that entry point into finding your awesome next best post-secondary opportunity. And then financial stability. We have a group that have been working on making sure that families were as stable as possible in their housing. Because when families move, children often have to move schools, and that can be really disruptive. And so we had a group that worked through the legislature last year to change the eviction notice period. And this seems really small, but it was the changes to 3 calendar days, or it had been 3 calendar days, change it to 3 business days, so that if you get an eviction notice on Friday, you actually can try to get help into the next week to get your rent instead of trying to access businesses and like community-based organizations, nonprofits that might be able to offer you rent assistance, but are likely closed on Saturday and Sunday. There's so much work going on in our community now about universal broadband, right? Treating broadband like a public utility where it's just understood that in the 21st century, that is as essential as things like electricity and water in the home. That's a huge precondition, I think, to reimagining our education system. And then we're really starting to dig into and talk about and ask, like, what would it be like to actually create wealth building mechanisms in our community? If you look at the long history of wealth building in our community, it's deeply flawed, deeply exclusionary to any group besides sort of white middle class folks. And so what would it be like if we were able to turn that on its head and actually help communities of color and provide much more dramatic and easily accessible wealth building mechanisms. What could that do for education? That's more of a root cause issue, right? That's basically saying we can sort of provide more stability, more financial stability for families in such a way where our school systems would benefit from that. The last thing I'm going to mention, and I have no idea what time it is, so let's see what I'm doing here. Pretty good on time. I'll mention two more things. So the first is that this summer we launched an initiative called Stay Safe, Stay Connected. And Stay Safe, Stay Connected was really rooted in the realities of the pandemic and really needing to respond in the moment. The pandemic really shone a spotlight on how broken our education systems really are. Those of us who have gone through the education system, and if it didn't work for us, we've always known it. Those of us who work on education-related issues and look at the data regularly, we have understood that. But on the whole, I just don't think our community and our country really realized how much our education system was failing students of color, low-income students, students who don't speak English, students with disabilities. And the pandemic, when all the schools went into soft closure in March, I think just showed a massive spotlight on those disparities and showed a massive spotlight on the fact that the education system was really designed for some students and really not designed for other students. So the first reaction that you have to that is sort of an immediate meet the need reaction. And that's what this bridging learning component of Stay Safe, Stay Connected was all about. It was really all about getting laptops to kids and families that don't have them so that they can engage in learning, making sure that families have the internet. So we've been trying to connect families to the internet and pay for it for them, connecting families to both virtual and safe in-person programming if they need it. So really just trying to rally around our community and really bring what we hope can help just bridge the gap in the pandemic as people are losing jobs and as schools are virtual. And then the really exciting part about Stay Safe, Stay Connected is this part about reimagining education. We're prompting schools and our school partnerships to really say, like, if you could do anything, what would you do to fundamentally change the way that your school is working, to fundamentally change the practices and policies in your school? So our hope is that by providing some staffing support, some award money, just some money to try new ideas and intervention, that we can surface really cool disruptions to the status quo at the school level, and we can encourage principals and teachers to work with parents and students to design something great, and that we can begin bubbling up those things that work and that actually move the needle on student outcomes and bubble them up to a systems level and begin to scale them across. So we have a couple really exciting things going with a couple schools that really being led by the schools. One is around completely dismantling the way that discipline is approached in a particular junior high school. So you've all heard about the school to prison pipeline and push out policy. And this school is really saying, like, we're not doing that anymore. We're going to fundamentally do this differently. We are going to keep every student here, and we are going to work on restorative justice practices and other things that are just totally radically different than how the school had been doing it before. We have another school partnership that is working to what they call detrack students. So students can get tracked into like gifted and talented programs and not very early, like very early in elementary school. And so they're working to say, we're not doing that. All the kids, everybody is a capable learner. Everybody is gifted and talented. And we're going to treat them as such. And we're going to see over the long term, if students have an educational experience where they start kindergarten and first grade in the same classroom, not tracked, what does that mean by the time they get to 8th grade? Would we see those trend lines be much closer together in proficiency rates between students groups because we actually gave everyone the same high quality education? So those are the things that we're really looking at. There's so many more examples, so many things we haven't even thought of that I'm sure are going to bubble up when we deeply engage with parents and students especially and ask them what they think needs to change in their school and how they'd like to see it be different. But the moment really is now to begin having these conversations it doesn't feel like it because it's busy and hectic and stressful. But again, I think if we don't seize this moment to fundamentally do bigger things more quickly, the moment might pass us by, because attention spans and awareness of these issues will, be gone potentially a year from now. So just one quick plug. If you want to dig a little bit deeper into these issues, I would encourage you to go to this website. Maybe I know you can grab that link, since I know it's not linkable, grabbable from the slide. But this is the president and CEO of PolicyLink. His name is Michael McAfee, and he is just an incredibly dynamic speaker on equity and results and cradle to career work, like I've been describing. And we had him come and talk, do an event several weeks back. And I just thought he was one of the just most inspiring people I've heard about why we need to be thinking deeply about equity and why we need to be attaching that to results. And he just really presents this rallying cry that extends beyond the current moment that we're in, but that I think is particularly salient for the moment that we're in. So definitely check it out. Encourage you to listen to it. I think it was it might just be audio, even though it was like a Zoom webinar. But at any rate, you'll be able to, all you really need to do is be able to hear it and be inspired by it. So with that, I'll turn it over, Ani, to you. I don't know are we doing Q&A? What's the next thing on our agenda?
Yes, Q&A. Does anybody have any questions? Feel free to put them in the